Good evening and welcome to today's lecture demonstration, Beauty in Motion, Beauty in Stillness. Japanese dolls for performance and decoration. My name is Megumi Koike and I am the Deputy Director of the Japan Information Cultural Center. First, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you back to the JICC after such an extended time apart. We have missed you, but I hope you will agree that this exhibit was worth the wait. I hope by now you have had the chance to view the exhibition on display in our newly renovated gallery. All the pieces are part of the Japan Foundation's traveling exhibition, Ningyō, Art and Beauty of Japanese Dolls. Tonight, the Japan Information and Cultural Center is proud to welcome Professor Kirk Kanesaka under his doll artisan's name of Kyūkyōka Kanesaka. Kanesaka-sensei earned the name of Kyūkyōka through the extensive training in the Kyūkyōka School of Doll Making. He and his mother, who creates under the name Kyūka, are teachers of this school. Kanesaka-sensei has actually two other earned names. He teaches classical Japanese dance under the earned name of Bando Hirohichiro, and under the earned name of Nakamura Gankyo, he is the only non-native Japanese to perform traditional kabuki. There are two ways of Japanese doll can be used: decoration and performance. In this lecture, Kanesaka-sensei will illuminate both of these uses for us. His training as both doll maker and kabuki performer makes him uniquely suited to do so. Sensei will give his insights into the craftsmanship of the dolls on display at the JICC gallery, vis-a-vis the carefully selected materials, century-old techniques, and painstaking detail work that goes into making one. Kanesaka-sensei will then give us a live demonstration of the doll making process. Several of Kanesaka-sensei's exquisite Kimekomi dolls are in the JICC's Tokonoma front window display, so please stop by to view them after this lecture. And now, without further ado, please welcome Kanesaka Kyūkyōka. Kanesaka-sensei.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So first off, too, I would like to thank you all for coming out here, venturing kind of the cold weather and the repeating kind of another winter storm. So thank you very much. And of course, in the height of this pandemic. But I really want to say thank you to the Japan Information Culture Center, especially to Nakamura-san and to Levitz-san and the rest of the staff here for giving me this honor to present to you something on a little bit of both of my kind of worlds that I really love. One is kind of academic and research, and the second side is sort of this creative type of side. So tonight's kind of lecture is going to encompass a little bit of both sides, both kind of this academic side and also this artisan side. Here are some also dolls that I brought in. These up here I'll be explaining through the lecture, but unfortunately my mother can't travel here, and so then I wanted her to be here because she has such an important impact on my life. And so then I brought one of her pieces to kind of with that feeling that she's here and kind of looking over me as I give this lecture and demonstration, something that she's been very passionate about all her life. So with that said, again, thank you very much for taking the time out and joining me today. Really quickly, the overview of kind of the way that I wanted to present this lecture is I'm going to be thinking about the overview of the doll history. I'm not really going to spend too much time on it. There's going to be this huge like Shinkansen super bullet train ride through history. But I want to give a little bit of overview and to try to think about what is the significance of dolls in Japanese culture. And then I wanted to move into this little bit more of a performative aspect and thinking about dolls not just for display purposes, but then also as a performative kind of vehicle to really highlight human emotions. And then I wanted to go into then the second part, which is the process of how do these artisans create these exquisite dolls. And then finally, I will demonstrate just really quickly this sort of technique of what we call Kimekomi doll making. Um, and then I'll open the floor up to questions that you may have. So with that said, already I won't spend too much time. As I was introduced, my name is Kirk Kanesaka. I teach at George Mason University. I teach actually pre-modern Japanese literature and culture is my specialty. And under the doll making name, I was just granted the name of Kyūkyōka. Q is coming from the Kyugetsu school. And then the Kyo is coming from my kabuki, background as being a Kyoto actor, but also because I've been learning under Maeda Yutaka, this type of Gosho Ningyo, the Imperial court dolls. And so this is also kind of originating from Kyoto and then became very, very popular and spread throughout Japan. And then finally, the Ka is from my mother's name, Kyūka. So with that said, then I really want to start off and think about the exhibit and how wonderful this exhibit is laid out. The minute you kind of walk through the doors, you're being transported from this sort of modern times, like this modern day or hectic life, especially thinking about the pandemic and work and all that stress. And really, the first thing you encounter are the two Musha dolls, the warrior dolls of Emperor Jinmu and Shoki. And already I felt like, yes, they're going to protect me. There's no more COVID beyond this point, you know. And as you just you walk through the history of what Japanese dolls are representing. And so I just want to kind of give you that overview again. And again, I'm really just stereotyping this and I'm really kind of overgeneralizing things in a little bit. But if we were to think about the prehistory, the ancient times, really the prehistoric kind of figures that we first see are what we call the dogu figures. And we don't really know what the purpose of these dogu figures were. We know that we find a lot of them broken. The limbs are broken. They're not really intact. And so we speculate, like archaeologists and anthropologists speculate that most likely these figures were created as a way of curing illnesses. So we find their limbs like a leg broken or arm broken. And so therefore, most likely this type of figure was supposed to be taking that disease and then you break the limb and therefore the person is healed. Again, there's no written text during this time period, so we're really not quite sure. And I'm skipping over the Kofun period, which is another fascinating period because we have the Haniwa clay figures. And I'm going to jump then to the Heian period because this is something that's on exhibit here as you walk in, facing the Shoki and Emperor Jinmu dolls, the Musha dolls. But when we get into the Heian period, we start seeing these kind of protective dolls for young kids. So for childbirth, safe childbirth, or overlooking and guarding the child's growth. And what's really important about all this is kind of the spiritual aspect, that how everything's being connected with Japanese dolls. And then when we get into the medieval period, I'm not talking so much about the particular genre of dolls that's emerging, but this technique called the gohun. This is the sort of Japanese porcelain that you're seeing, that we see that's covering the bodies of the Gosho Ningyo or the faces of the dolls themselves. But this is sometime emerging from this medieval period. And I'll talk a little bit more about it when we go into looking at the different stages of how to make a Gosho Ningyo. But what I was telling Levit-san earlier, it's mind-blowing whoever developed this technique, and it's most likely probably imported from the continent, meaning from China to Japan, but you're mixing oyster shells, grind up oyster shells with the extract from animal bones as a glue, and we're layering this. So it's a little bit different than the Western kind of porcelain where we're baking porcelain. And then I'm going to skip over the early modern period a little because this is kind of the most important period that I wanted to focus on. But when we get into the modern period, so about 1868, and again, I'm really overgeneralizing these time periods. But what's really interesting, we see a shift in a little bit here. We see that not so much the emergence of ichimatsu, because the ichimatsu already comes from that early modern period, but the meaning behind it. And I'm highlighting here the 1920s friendship dolls, the blue-eyed dolls that was sent from the United States to Japan. And in return, Japan sent ichimatsu, these huge ichimatsu dolls, as a way of understanding each other's cultures. And we start seeing that the dolls are symbolizing a little bit something different than kind of protectiveness over the child's birth or growth of the child, but something that becomes a little bit more play things or educational things. And then, of course, I jumped to Hello Kitty here because when Hello Kitty was invented, it was also meant as a friendship doll. And so we kind of start seeing these kind of trends that we would think about. And finally, of course, in the contemporary period, which this piece is also on display, but something that's being more like towards collective means, like a collector's item. And really, we don't see that notion, the mindset of collecting dolls in pre-modern Japan. Wealthy estates may have multiple dolls, but it wasn't like they're out there saying, okay, I'm going to collect all these dolls. And I'm talking about up to the early modern period. It wasn't really until the Meiji period when the influx of Western kind of ideas and civilization was coming into Japan that the mindset of kind of collecting it was introduced to Japan. So again, really, we see this sort of split between the pre-modern, I'm talking about everything before 1868, in the mentality of what these dolls are kind of symbolizing, even though it's still being carried over in Japanese culture. And so finally, I want to kind of focus on this early modern period because this is the time period that the dolls really flourish. We see this explosive kind of production of dolls for consumerism. And the reason why is because the early modern period is a time that really is this golden age of peace and prosperity. We're emerging out of kind of the warring states period, the Civil War time, before this during the medieval period. And we start seeing the arts flourish. And so two really kind of huge examples that are going to become marketable, not just to the kind of elites like the aristocrats or the samurai lords, but also now to the merchant class who are gaining mass amounts of wealth and then patroning these type of art. But we see the very famous Hina Matsuri, the Girls' Day dolls of the nobleman and noblewoman of the court, which then later kind of, it started off as more of a tachibina that you saw kind of in the very front case. And then it got more and more elaborate. And then you added the court attendants, the musicians, and then you added kind of the furniture, the dogu, yomeiri dogu. And that's such an Edo concept because when a woman goes to get married and gets married off, she has to bring with her furniture. And so those sets are not really part of the aristocratic kind of court during the Heian period, but that's representing the girl taking those furniture as part of her dowry when she gets married off. And then, of course, we see these musha dolls. Originally, May 5th now. Does everybody know what May 5th is in Japan is called right now? Boys' Day? May 5th? March 3rd is Girls' Day. May 5th is Kodomo no Hi, right? Japan switched it from Boys' Day to Children's Day, Kodomo no Hi, because it had this sort of militaristic connotation to it. And so now these kind of musha dolls, though, still are representing the strength and protective kind of aspects over the boys' livelihood and life. So usually these dolls, too, represent an aspect of that child's life when someone has to go for an entrance exam, for example. Maybe the parents will take this out and display it, even though it has nothing to do with Girls' Day or Boys' Day. just so that it will protect them and help them through these troubled times. Likewise, unfortunately, in Japan, because they have this sort of spiritual connection to these dolls, when the family no longer needs the dolls, they give it once a year. There's once a year in Japan that we call Ningyō Kuyo, where they gather all the dolls and they burn the dolls because they are saying thank you for your service, and now we release you from it, right? So again, these dolls are still having that aspect of that kind of spiritual aspect even today. So again, during the early modern period, we see this explosiveness of these doll makers that are being commissioned to make different dolls. And so this is actually from a book called The Mask of the Treasure Ship. And this was published in about 1827. And here we have, it's a book about all these different jobs that professions. And one of them is called Ningyō, right? Which means the doll maker. And you can see here, he has a various type of dolls. Like you can see that Gosho Ningyo. These look like more like bunraku heads, right? And so we already know what type of professions that these are turning into. These dolls are no longer the sort of just products that may be commissioned by one or two families, but now more and more consumerism. Again, that growing base of the wealth of the merchant class is expanding in the early modern period. So we still have two different types of two categories. One is for display. The Gosho Ningyo, which I'll talk about in a little bit, are what we call the court imperial dolls. These originally started under the commission of the court itself in Kyoto, not the shogun court, the aristocratic court. So whenever a daimyo or lord or an aristocrat came to the emperor and greeted the emperor cordially and showed its alliance, as a return favor, the emperor then commissioned these Gosho Ningyo as a gift back to that particular lord. These Gosho Ningyos became so popular that it just spread throughout Japan. I can't remember. Actually, I think there it is. If you actually see, not the modern rugby, is it rugby or the football player? Sorry, version of the Gosho Ningyo, but the traditional his father's works. You can see there's red strings that he actually draws on the ties. That's very significant because we call that mizuhiki, which means that that's a protective amulet for prosperity and good health. That's what that red is symbolizing when they draw it. I can't draw that. It takes so much talent. But even today, that type of resonance in it, even the modern version, I was talking to Levitz-san the other day, the patterns on like the helmet, the patterns on the ball is representing different things of protection against evil spirits and protection against injury. That's really part of that, even the modernized Gosho Ningyo. And then we have something that's another category for performance that's starting to emerge. Of course, bunraku really is starting in the medieval period, but it heightens and it becomes what we know it today, the puppet theater in this early modern period. In addition, we have something for toys. I'm not quite sure how many of you guys seen these Karakuri Ningyo, these mechanical dolls? Have you? Oh, okay, one or two, right? These are fascinating. There's a whole bunch of gears in here. This one's bringing tea. It actually brings it to you. When you take it off, it turns around and goes back to where it came from. There's one that shoots arrows, one that writes kotobuki, prosperity, and things like that. But these are now we're starting to see these dolls emerging as part of kind of like performative and also part of this kind of toy, part of the household toys now that's emerging. But one aspect of the performance side that I wanted to think about is dolls as performance. And when the early modern period started, we have the puppet theater that's coming out. Really, the basic function of the puppet theater, when it first starts out, that we start seeing in the early modern period, is actually one doll manipulator, and then it started to become three, right? The main doll manipulator is exposed here, and manipulates the head and the right hand. The second in command is going to be manipulating the left hand. And the very youngest of the three is going to be manipulating the feet. Part of the bunraku theater is also the importance of the taiyu, or the singer, as well as the shamisen. So then how do these dolls kind of also reflect that notion of kind of spirits and protection and things that we see that is kind of embedded in the display aspect? Well, with dolls and these bunraku dolls, these were actually vehicles for deities to manifest themselves. And so when we look at folkloric kind of traditions, we have two ways that a deity can manifest itself. One is through what we call the miko, the shrine attendant. And the second is through these temporary kind of lodging, like these dolls. So they would create a wooden doll so that the spirit can come in, manifest himself or herself, purify everyone, and then can leave the body. And this is kind of that same tradition that we see in the bunraku theater. So for example, whenever the taiyu, the singer, starts his portion of singing, narrating, and reciting the lines, he always has to bow to the book. So I just wanted to show this quick clip of that, highlighting that. From the stage, if I may be a little bit mistaken, but here, what I wanted to highlight though, no matter whether they're sitting off to the side and they're kind of coming out from the revolving stage and they come face the front, they're always bowing to the book before they begin. Again, this is paying homage to the book. It's also paying homage to the characters that are coming out. It has this kind of spiritual aspect to it. When medieval period especially believed that through the words and recitation of words, those people comes back to life, right? That's really important when we think about the Heike Monogatari, for example, the recitation of the tales of Heike, that these spirits are going to be pacified through the recitation and the mentioning of their names and during the recounting of this particular tale. So this type of tradition is still presented here in that bunraku theater. So we still see that kind of aspect, right? That it's connecting the dolls that are meant for talismans and protective aspects and for display, as well as part of the performance. Now, another thing that I wanted to show and highlight, because there is a wonderful bunraku doll that is so rare to see outside of Japan, because those bunraku dolls are always has to be made by that puppeteer, including the costume. That's all handmade by the lead puppeteer. And so I wanted to show just a little bit difference then between kabuki, live person acting, and the dolls. Because somehow when we see the dolls in bunraku, we start to forget that they're inanimate objects. All of a sudden, they seem to be more human than the human, maybe perhaps actor themselves. So I want to highlight the same exact scene from the Love Lament, the Kudoki, from the house of the sake merchant. And this is a very, very tragic tale because Osono knows that her husband is cheating with a courtesan. They even have, her husband and the courtesan has a child. And she laments about this, and not so much that she curses him or she's angry with him or anything, but she grieves over this fact. And eventually, her husband and the courtesan goes off and commits lover suicide. So this is the particular scene, exactly the same music that's being played out here, but what the lyrics goes, I knew that Hanhichi was not enamored with me, yet I wanted to remain by his side even if we no longer share the same bed. And in the end, this situation brought misfortune upon Hanhichi. I should have resolved to die last year, for my present suffering hurts me even more. Dear Hanhichi, from the bottom of my heart, I ask you to forgive me. So I wanted to highlight this, and then you can see, not just in the choreography, but also through these kind of impossible manipulation of the doll that cannot be done physically, how much of that human emotions comes to life. So first, I'm going to start off with the kabuki version. This is done by Sakata Tojuro. So he was Nakamura Senjaku at this particular time. And this was presented in February 1978 presentation, and she's doing a lot of housework, right? Which is really highlighting what a perfect wife she is. She's prepping the room to welcome back her husband, and meanwhile she's bottling up a lot of those kind of emotions. And I want to contrast this then exactly the same scene with the bunraku, and the bunraku is a lot faster. It's about, I think, maybe 2 minutes shorter than the kabuki version. Different movements. You can see how in the bunraku version it's a little bit more explosive in the amount of emotions that's being conveyed. And really, when you start looking at it close and when you start getting more and more into this particular scene, the manipulator, the lead kind of puppeteer kind of just disappears, you know, and you just start focusing on the dolls and the movements and that extraordinary poses, the striking poses that cannot be done by humans, right? Especially when you look from, I can't do this, but you know, the shoulders are kind of very narrow and it kind of goes out with the skirt of the train of the kimono, the suso. I mean, it's just so moving and so touching. And then again, I just want to highlight the two different ways. One is kind of more internalized and is playing to the aspect that what a great wife is. But the exact same scene is very different because here the emotions are very much out there because the doll has to come to life, right? But it's amazing that the face too, it's the same face. It's not changing any of the gestures, but just moving it up and down to the side, it really looks like it's coming to life. So now I'm going to go into this kind of second part of the lecture, which is the process of making these type of dolls that you have seen as you're walking through the gallery space. And I wanted to first start off with the Gosho Ningyo. And unfortunately, I can't do any of this here because it takes a lot of time to do this. I was taking pictures and I wanted to try to finish him. This is what we call Tanabata. The name of the doll is called Tanabata, which is for the Weaver Boy and Weaver Girl celebration that takes place. But I kind of changed it in a little bit because it's the year of the tiger. So I made him holding this sort of tiger for commemoration of the year of the tiger. But I want to start off then thinking about how it is the process of making this Gosho Ningyo. So I started off, and you can come up here later. I just asked you to be careful, like don't bump the table or anything. But we start off with what we call tonso. Tonso is a mixture of kiriko, which is like a sawdust, mixed with a particular special glue called shofu nori, which is coming from a plant. And so we first start with the body formation. So you can see here, and then I'm going to fix the body in a little bit. Like I like mine in a little bit more chubby, and I like to, you know, his oshiri, his behind to be a little bit more defined. So then, and I also added some of the hair, like the sideburns and the top knot, etc., etc. So here I am doing kind of the body repair first, and then I'll sand this all down. And so you can see then after it's dry, you can see the places that I patched a little bit to kind of even out the shape. Now, there is another way of making gosho dolls, which is what we call ipponbori. Ipponbori means that you take a piece of wood and then you carve it into that figure, and then you start that process. I'm doing what we call tonso, which is again, it's kind of like wood putty maybe, but and then you start shaping the body, the dolls. Then after that initial kind of stage, we're going to go into making the gofun. So here we have a mixture again of nikawa. This is sort of animal extract from the bones. This is in the hardened state. We'll melt this down, and then it becomes quite sticky. It becomes very, very sticky. And then we mix it with gohun, which is these ground up oyster shells. And when we mix the two together, then we get this sort of paste. And then we apply this sort of paste, this liquid paste, in layers to the dolls. I was complaining to Levit-san that I'm a Southern California native. So I was like, oh my God, ever since I moved here, the summers and the extreme humidity, you have to take all that into kind of account when you're making this, because the ratios of the glue, quote unquote glue, the nikawa and the gofun is going to be changing because of the amount of humidity. I was like, oh my gosh, it's cracking. I never experienced this in my life before. And I was complaining to him one time in August in the backstage for another event. But this is what we're going to apply. So after the first application, which we call jinuri, it'll look like this. The jinuri is about 3 applications. So we will apply it the first time, let it dry. Then we'll apply it the second time, let it dry, and the third time, and we let it dry. Then we're going to do the next step, which is shitanuri, which is the kind of the second application. You might be thinking, well, what is the difference? The ratio between the nikawa and the gofun is changing. We're changing that ratio of how much of each we're using. Here, this is again after 3 applications. You can kind of start seeing how it becomes a lot more wider and is taking that kind of shape. Then after this, we're going to do okiyage, which is going to be the middle one here. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the gofun and we're going to use it to create some facial features. So we're going to put the eyes in, the nose, the mouth, the fingers, and then the ear onto the side. So this is what we call okiyage. And then after this, we're going to, again, paint it down about 5 times, which we call nakanuri. And again, I wanted to try to finish him. He's at this end of the nakanuri stage. We're going to apply it 5 times. And then after that, we're going to do what we call mizubuki, which we're going to apply the gofun paste. And then when it dries, we're not going to kind of sand it. We're going to take a wet cloth and we're going to start rubbing it. So we're going to get all the imperfections out from the dolls, any bubbles, holes, anything along those lines. It's going to happen in this stage. Then step 7, we're going to cut the eyes, the fingers, the toes, the toenails, etc., into the details. This is my teacher demonstrating cutting the eyes on the gosho doll. And then after this, we're going to go into what we call jounuri, the uppermost and the most important kind of layer. This is going to add that shine. Now we can no longer touch the doll with our bare hands because the oil destroys the finish from our hands. And then we're going to go into menso, which is drawing the facial features. And then afterwards, we're going to add any other type of details. So here's one of my gosho dolls. This dog is actually my Pomeranian. I love her so much. Sorry, not love. She's still alive. She's 12. But she's also my princess. So I kind of have myself pulling her. And you can see then I added like the gold threads and everything. And then the clothing itself is done by 100% silk. I embroidered in the Nihon Shishu style, which is the Japanese embroidery, which is also 100% silk for their clothing. Now, the menso portion, because I wasn't able to finish this guy to take pictures for you today, I used the different heads here to demonstrate drawing the features. I wanted to do this in person, but I'm not a pro. So it takes me about 30 minutes to 1 hour to draw because we use such watered down ink. It's almost like you can barely see the lines. And so I wanted to do this in person, but unfortunately I said, no, I don't want to bore you guys. But here you can see there's one face that without anything, any of the drawings. And you can start seeing that I'm drawing in the eyes. It gets it's very, very light. And then I'm darkening this. And again, I'm just layering the sumi, the ink, over and over again. And then also taking into account the middle of the eyes. And then drawing that particular in. Here again, it's getting a little bit deeper. By now, I'm moving on into the eyebrows. So you can see how thin I'm drawing the eyebrows in at this stage. Also here too, it's starting to take shape. And then finally, I'm okay, this is, I'm happy with this face now. And then I'm going to apply the the lips at the very end. After this, then we call keppatsu, or applying the hair. And I'm sorry, I realized I was talking to Levitz-san too today. This looks like kind of like something from Ringu, right? So I'm sorry about it. I hope you don't get kind of scared about the middle one, but I want to demonstrate kind of the process that we do. We use, this is actually silk. It's silk threads that we use. And it takes about an hour, hour and a half to iron this so that we can use it in order to get this shape that we want on the hair. Here I'm making the special glue. We use shofu nori again. So I'm making the glue we to use. And here you can see, sorry for the mess of my room. I wanted to like somehow highlight this out, but here is the suga, the silk threads here, and I'm ironing this. So this will take about 1 hour, hour and a half for me to iron it on a very, very high heat. It starts smoking also. And then you can see that I'm starting with the front, the maegami, and then we'll move to the sides, and then to the back. We'll apply the back. And then this particular style is what we call fukiwata, where we take the silk threads and we blow, and it opens up. It balloons out and creates the cap, which is now in the second phase here. So what's really interesting, if you go out into the doll exhibit, you can see the swaru ichimatsu. It's perfectly pretty. It's like a pattern on the top of the head. That's from that blowing effect of the threads. And then finally, we do like a haircut for the doll. And then this head is now complete, and you can use it for the doll, whatever doll you would like to use it for. So then I'm going to introduce you to a particular technique that's really special to me because my mother has taught me all these years. It's called Kimekomi. And ki, if we look at this, the sinograph means wood because this is made out of a wood body. And then me means grooves. So we tuck the fabric into the grooves. And of course, I gave it away, but komi, the last sinograph, means tucking the grooves into, tucking the fabric into the grooves. This particular technique originated in the early modern period, most likely by a priest named Tadashi, who used willow trees and carved these dolls and then adorned it with the leftover or scraps of priest clothing and then sold it as trinkets in Kyoto. Nowadays, because of the modernization process, we see more and more factories in the mass production of the bodies that can now be used for hobbyists and to really kind of teach the next generation this kind of dying art form. So here too, we have on display 2 Kimekomi Ningyos. I didn't know, but this is actually from Kyūgetsu. You can tell because of the face is very much Kyūgetsu style. So I was very, very shocked and excited when I saw these 2 pieces. But again, if you have a time, please go ahead and take a look on your way out. There are 2 dolls representing Kimekomi. So now I wanted to demonstrate how this technique is. No, I hope everyone can see. I know it's kind of COVID, but I don't know if you wanted to maybe come up closer while social distancing, but let's see. Okay. So we use special tools. We have, for example, what we call the heda. And this heda is what we use to tuck the fabric into the groove. So I basically completed this whole thing, and I'm just going to put in this back piece here. So what we're going to do is we're going to first apply the glue into the grooves. Sorry, I'm going to be doing a little bit of a message up, so I'm going to do this a little bit fast. So you can see, sorry, I got it all over the fabric too, but you can see here, I put the glue around in the grooves. Then what we're going to do is we're going to put this fabric, and then we're going to put it over, and then we're going to start dressing it. So we're going to start tucking this fabric in. And then, so you can see it's kind of tucked in temporarily. Then you're going to trim the fabric as much as you can, as close as you can to the groove. And then the final thing is we're going to then tuck the remaining fabric in so that none of the fabric is sticking out. One of the interesting things about Kimekomi dolls is the fact that we don't leave any space kind of exposed on the body. Everything has to be covered. Some of the dolls, though, you can tell or you can see, like I brought the Ichimatsu doll. She's one of my favorites, but we use a mixed type of techniques. So I used Kimekomi for majority of it, but we also call kiseru, which means dressing. So like the eri is done as if you were to dress a real person, and not, if the fabric isn't tucked. So you can see that piece went in. And so this actually is finished, and then I'm going to go a little bit over time, but I'm going to go ahead and start finishing this particular into this strap. So I don't know if you decide if you want to open the kind of lecture portion is kind of done, so I don't know if you want to open the floor to questions as I'm trying to. I'll try to multitask and try to also finish this.
If you're able to take questions now at the same time, I mean,
I'll try my best.
It's more impressive for our audience, you know, and that's to be able to do both. So, you know, if Sensei's gonna walk and chew gum, who wants to join on this venture?
The Kokeshi dolls are sort of intrinsically primitive, and I'm wondering if the actuality is that these do in fact show up much earlier in the historical record. And second, if I may, are doll makers sometimes recognized as living national treasures?
Okay, fantastic question, and I'm sorry I'm not looking up. So please, I apologize this ahead of time. The Kokeshi doll, and what's really fascinating and what I really admire about this traveling exposition is the fact that it's representing not just kind of dolls as a fine art, but also these kind of folk type of aspects. Those Kokeshi dolls are actually, looks quite simplistic, but it's so difficult to actually create one of those because the forms have to be identical, it has to be symmetrical. Definitely though, when we think about the early stages of dolls, especially going back into the Heian period, where it may just have been a paper, like there's a paper figure out there that maybe also closely associated with something called onmyoji, right? The yin-yang kind of deviations. But definitely thinking about kind of the primitiveness and perhaps that lingering in that particular region where then that folk kind of craft takes over, right? That's quite amazing, that table of just the folk art representing different kind of areas, and really then thinking about how those are reflecting that particular cultural taste at that particular time. The second part of the question, the answer is yes. We do have doll makers in Japan that are actually recognized as national living treasures. Fantastic question. Thank you. So now I'm sorry, I'm not stabbing him on purpose. I'm putting the eyes in now.
Further questions? Or is everybody just excited to see the final product?
I was wondering a little bit more about the fabric as well and the embroidery that you were talking about. So do you create all of your own fabric and embroidery, or do you incorporate work from other artists in that side of it?
So another very, very fantastic question. Usually, we will commission like a particular fabric maker or artisan to create those type of fabrics and prints. We don't usually tend to do it ourselves. There are some doll makers or doll artisans, I should say, that does. It just so happened that I love doing things with my hands. I don't really like, actually, I shouldn't be saying this. I hope this is not being recorded, but I tended as a child not to sit still and read a book. My brother or sister loved reading books, and so I always liked moving my hands. And so it really fascinated me then, because I couldn't get those prints that I wanted for the dolls. And so then I decided when I was in Japan, okay, I'm going to study Nihon Shishu, which is Japanese embroidery. So actually I went on my own to learn how to do Japanese embroidery for the dolls. And then I also said, well, just Shishu is not omoshirokunai. Just using one technique is not interesting enough. So then I went and also learned Yuzen, which is the Japanese kind of dyeing of the fabrics. That way, I will have the capability of making my own patterns and attires for the dolls that I wanted to create. But usually we would try to maybe go out and, like the Ichimatsu here, I was telling the person who did all the displays that I was at Minamiza for the whole month performing for the Kanesaka. And during my break time, which is very, very short, I like to go out and get some fresh air. And then I went to this gofuku-yasan, but it's a furugi-yasan. It was an old second-hand kimono shop. And I saw this. This is kyo shibori. This means it's a shibori done in Kyoto. And it was for like a child chanchanko type of outfit. And I go, oh my God, this is so great. And so I said, I had to get it. And I think I spent like $150 or something at that time. And then I felt, I was like, oh my God, moshiwake nai kana to omotte. When I was making her, I was like, cutting this up, right? The fabric, I was like, oh my God, please don't get upset with me, whoever had this before. But those type of inspiration, it comes from inspiration, just walking around and doing some shopping and taking a breath there or something, yeah. Great question.
I don't imagine that you're doing something like this, but can somebody who has the skill set that you have use these techniques to make something altogether different from just as an experimental thing to do? Like, could you use these techniques to make an abstraction or something that's completely outside of the historical tradition? So
that's a fantastic question. And definitely, I think what is really, really interesting about Japanese dolls is the fact that these techniques aren't just kind of creating something that's quote unquote traditional in the modern sense. And so using the techniques like the gofun, you could definitely create your own type of modern dolls. So I do see artisans that are creating very much dolls. Like there was a series of dolls in the Kimekomi technique that came out of highlighting Italian fashions, so fashion models that were coming out. So definitely. Right now, when I'm doing a special class with my own students, even though it's the pandemic and we really can't meet face to face, is designing your own kind of ball. And I encourage them to use multimedia, not just, I mean, the base of it is Kimekomi, but I'm encouraging them to think outside the box. If you're an artist, like a painter, I'm not really good at painting, but using the ball, Kimekomi technique of putting the fabric in, but then using that as a canvas and painting onto the ball, for example, et cetera, et cetera. So most definitely, I think it is very, very important for the next generation to also know how to access this technique, but then also recreating it to represent their own heritage and their own vision. Yeah, fantastic question. So I just finished him very sloppily, but I just finished that one that I was working on.
Well, if you'd like, we can take more questions, or we could bring the audience down to see the creations if you'd rather.
Yeah, I mean, you can ask questions. You can go ahead and walk around. And you can ask any questions about any of the items that are brought here. Also, it would be fantastic. Yeah.
But just for right now, let's all just thank Kanesaka-sensei for sharing his expertise and time with us.
Well, thank you so much. And then again, I really, really want to say thank you to the Japan Information and Culture Center for hosting me and being very generous. And really, I hope, you seize this fantastic opportunity. I haven't in my lifetime seen this history of dolls, just walking from the front and all the way to the back to this auditorium to see that many dolls being put together. I think this is a revision of a tour before. I kept telling Nakamura-san, the director here, I was like, can't you just extend it? It's so sad. But it's just so fantastic. And I hope you will get lost in the beauty of the dolls themselves as you walk and make your way home.
Thank you so much for that. Before we go, I just also wanted to remind everybody we're going to send out a survey, and we would love to know your thoughts on tonight's presentation, because it was our first back, in 2 years. I don't know. It still feels like March 2020. But thank you all for coming out on this night, and we welcome you all back to the JICC. We feel welcome back to the world. So it was just wonderful having you all here. Thank you for coming.